Hi everybody, this is Hero back with another Dragonflight video. And in this video, I'd like to talk about an interesting news item that came out recently on the PTR, and this was a change that is being made for WoW loot and how loot is going to be defined and shaped in the game. It's a pretty straightforward change, but it has a lot of implications. So I just have some Warlock testing in the background for you to enjoy as I talk through what this major gear trading change is. So I'll just read it for you, and then I will talk a little bit about some of the reaction that's happened and why I think it might be actually very good for the game. So gear trading now has a time limit, which increased. It was 2 hours when they first released it, but it's now increased to 4 hours, including the time while the character with the gear is offline. So this is like a major categorical shift in Blizzard's approach to gearing. Before, you could receive a piece of loot from the boss, and there would be usually a blue tag underneath that told you, hey, you can trade this with other people in the group. And if you logged off on that character, the timer on that tag would stop ticking down. And when you log back onto the game, the tag would resume and start ticking from wherever it was. So that made it that guilds could hold on to gear if they wanted to. You could kill a few bosses, and then if you weren't sure where the gear was going to go to, you could pile it onto a character, tell them to log off for the meantime, and then bring them back afterwards. So one of the things that's very interesting about this change is it seems to target what we usually think of as the top end players or the world first racing guilds, whose goal in that very, very brief time at the beginning of a patch is to kill the boss as fast as possible and clear the raid. One of the ways to do that is to funnel or target gear to specific players on specific tunes. And so if you have some determinism within your model for how to do that, how to get the mage on your group completely loaded out, the team that can do that the fastest, generally speaking, has a significant advantage in completing the content, because if it takes Guild X only a week's time in all of their investment in the game to line up and prepare all the gear that they need for their 20 raiders, the main ones that are going to tackle the content, that is a very short order that prepares them to tackle Mythic. And it's kind of cool. What it usually involves is what we call split heroics, where a guild will complete the heroic raid having brought into it tunes that aren't designed to be ones that will go and compete in the Mythic level, but can still loot from the bosses because they haven't completed them, and they can pass that loot on to the group. So you tend to see this. We've seen this many times if you've watched the Race to World First. The guilds get into the raid. They form up a bunch of split raids for heroics to aim gear at a number of different tunes. Sometimes they have multiples of the same tune. That is to say, one player who's in the guild will have 4 or 5 mages, and they will send that mage through 4 or 5 times through heroics, and they will bring with it a whole bunch of cloth characters to maximize the amount of gear that can be sent to that character. But here's the trick. That all makes sense and it seems fine to me. It's a lot of time investment to do it. But what does this change have to do with that strategy? Well, there's a couple of major problems with performing split raids the way we have in the past, given this new paradigm. The first major problem is that you cannot store that gear indefinitely on a character and then at the end of a week or two pull it all out in a spreadsheet and distribute it to all the correct players. It vastly decreases the efficiency with which these split raids can target gear onto a player. The second thing it does, and it's sort of related, is it makes it so that you cannot wait until the Great Vault opens. The Great Vault being the place where you can do your PvP, Mythic Plus, or raiding, and then you get a reward at the end of the week for whatever you completed. So if you've done your Mythic 20s and you've done a bunch of them, you have 3 slots where you could potentially get gear. Heroic, similarly, in raiding, you would have 3 slots available for the tune. What you can do on your main is you can wait to receive any gear that you had in the past weeks of split raiding. You can find the exact right piece in your vault, and for these Mythic raiding World First guilds, there'll be somebody within their community that's telling people, here's what we have available, here's the sort of thing you're looking for in the vault, and then they'll all make a decision as one big group. Okay, Charlie needs to pick this piece from the vault, and it's basically selected for you in order to micromanage all of the gear that's going to be coming out. So that cannot happen anymore. You cannot hold gear and then as a group put it all on the table, and you cannot wait for the vault to give you the right drop and then put on gear afterwards. So what this has tended to mean in historically is groups have got a lot of what we might call mules, which is people in the community that really love their team and want to see them succeed. They come on and help with their own alts to funnel the gear. So they trade for in-game gold, the drop chance for their character to give something to the other raiders. And this has been changed in part because of Need for Greed having a change, which is different from the party loot system where you had to be a little more careful who you brought, because if they were locked out, um, or if they got a piece of gear and they just didn't happen to have the eye level for that one slot, they were forced to take it. But now Need for Greed allows any player who hasn't completed the boss to come and just press pass, and so all the gear can be funneled to the main raid. Now, here's the rub. People are kind of freaking out about this change. All of these factors seem to be targeted at the world first raiders. And one of the strongest responses to this change is from that community. And they're sort of asking the question, does this really impact anybody else but us? And why would you make this sort of a change? I think there's two kinds of answers to this. The first answer is, on a very broad level, no, it doesn't merely affect world first raiders. It doesn't impact the race to world first dramatically, but it also prevents other guilds and players from taking gear that is really designed as an immediate reward for achieving a kill and holding out on it. So the average player group might develop this same strategy of waiting for the vault, or of forcing a player to log off with a bunch of gear to save it while the raid continues on. This stuff does occur even at the pug level, and the behavior of the world first raiders does leak down in the spirit of it to the other player base. So in the broadest sense, it's really good to just iron out for the whole player base. Gear is designed to be an immediate reward. It's not designed to be shoved into a spreadsheet and then divvied up into all of these little pieces and for people to just wait and not have access to it. So let's make it something that you put on right away and you target it. But that's kind of a weak answer. That's not really the truest answer to the question, this seems to only affect world first raiders. Why did we do this? The second answer is that it actually has a good impact, in my view, on the race to world first. Yes, I think it's good for the race. And here are a couple of reasons why I think so. The first thing is it limits the efficiency of essentially what has become a pay-to-win strategy. That is to say, you're buying gear, BOEs, and also you're buying the heroic split effort of another player, which has to be balanced then with time spent in any PvP to gather gear, or Mythic Plus, or on Mythic Boss progression itself. So it puts the race back on track to be a race where the players are just playing their tunes as a team, trying to compete and defeat the mythic bosses, rather than them playing this strange game of roulette where they're holding all of their winnings in the back corner until they get precisely the right combination, and then they're going to participate in the match. It also gives teams that lack the same reach and influence as the bigger guilds a great deal of fairness in the playing field. Now, what I mean by this is, if you look at the top guilds in each region, they essentially are like gravitational wells at the beginning of a race to world first. They suck in all of the potential players that could trade, and they do this whole heroic split thing, dominating all of the auction house trading on almost every server. You just see them paying huge amounts of actual real currency, in-game, in-world money, to buy gold so that they can transfer things all over the place. This strategy is still going to be in place. Blizzard didn't eliminate it, but it makes it less efficient because you have to do far more split runs to get the same effect as what you had before. If you want to have 4 mages on the one character, or excuse me, on the one player, those 4 mages are going to take far more time because you have to decide far earlier where the gear is going to go. So if in run number one with the mage, that mage gets no drops, the chances that that mage is going to be useful later diminish dramatically. Yes, maybe they get an awesome drop in their vault at the end of the week, but because they couldn't trade or hold on to the gear and they got no drops passed to them in that entire encounter, the chances that those teams are going to use that one mage or the four go down dramatically. So in a way, it helps the players who are not in a position to leverage giant communities that can funnel all kinds of gear. It helps them to be on a better starting point as far as the gear is concerned. Obviously, player skill is what we're hoping really matters when it comes to the race to world first, and this gives a little bit of that back. Now, I just want to close with a couple of strategies that I think we will start to see in the next little bit. I'm guessing people will test these out, for example, on the PTR in other spots. You probably will see the world first raiders do full inventory checks. So they will go into a raid. They will have everybody have every bag slot open. Maybe they'll just take off all their bags, and so they only have the one backpack, so it's not so tedious. And then they will mail, they will see if the mail system retains the timer. So if you don't understand what I mean, when you try to loot something in the game, if your bags are full, the game will send it to your mailbox. And so you can go to your mailbox and check. And they will probably start by checking to see, does the mailbox induce the timer? And if it does not induce the timer, meaning the piece has to be actually physically put into your inventory before the timer takes over, you'll see basically full inventory raids trying to get around this situation. The other thing you might see is the bosses not being touched at all after kill. So the race to world first teams will kill the bosses, and then the golden, coin flourish of light that goes up into the air will remain, and they will leave the boss and go to the next one and kill it, and go to the next one and kill it, and so on and so forth. And then they will log out and then come back in and check and see if the ID retains the loot on the bosses or if it gets mailed or sent to someone else. So those are the two main strategies that I think might help save the race to world first people in this circumstance. But I also see a couple of basic strategies if that doesn't work and they are forced to deal with this stupid timer in their mind. Number one, you will see some teams, maybe some of the European teams especially, push really hard to do way more splits and to just come up with an insane schedule for doing that and game or basically suggest we probably are not going to be able to kill the mythic boss. We usually wait to see if it gets tuned while the NA group goes through that portion. We think we really are going to need this gear. So we're going to continue with this strategy and we are just going to do all kinds of splits for way longer than we normally would to guarantee that we get the best outcome we possibly can. So that's one strategy you might see is just people avoiding Mythic essentially and doing more splits than usual to try to game it. You might see some of the teams say, we will just kind of do a best shot approach. We'll do a mediocre amount of splits and we will essentially take our raid team from everyone needing to prepare 4 or 5 tunes down to something like 2 to 3 tunes. Or for guilds that really don't, like, not the race to world first guilds that usually win, but some in the secondary bracket, maybe your top 50, you might see those guilds say, screw it, we're just doing 1 tune. And we'll do some split runs with our friends and all that kind of stuff, but we're just going to try to funnel on 1 tune and then just go with whatever we get. But I imagine you'll see this waffling for some of the teams where they feel like we don't know if we should commit to further split runs. Because you see, the problem was before, for the teams that did all kinds of split runs, you could guarantee after a certain amount of time of doing split runs that you would have gathered enough gear to trade around to everybody. But now it starts to be a bit more of a gamble. So I think this actually makes for a lot of interesting interactions. I know that the race to world first people will not be happy with this, and it's frustrating, and they'll find it detracts from their experience. However, that's partly on them for thinking that this is how the game should be addressed, that we should just store up all this gear and buy it all up and buy it from every server and essentially shrink the whole race into a horse race between 2 to 3 guilds. I think it's good for the community because guilds will be forced to contend with this tension of doing more split raids for the chance of getting things for their tunes and trying to complete and have a better strategy for completing the bosses. So we'll see. Let me know what you guys think about this. We'll check you next time.